The Tennessee Titans still have some big questions to answer before training camp, and a lot of those answers will be free agent signings. I'll tell you who they should go after on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Today, we're looking at the biggest remaining questions for the Tennessee Titans now that they are into their last week of offseason practices. These questions need to be answered either before training camp or during training camp. But obviously, we are going to start with which free agents the Tennessee Titans still need to sign. And there are a few positions they definitely still need help at. Then we'll look at the defensive side of the ball and talk about who will fill the open starting spots on that side of the ball. And then we'll go to offense and special teams, talk about the right side of the offensive line and returners as well. So a lot to dive into. Before we do, thank you for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. Shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. Tomorrow, the Titans will have their last open OTA to the media. I'm going to be breaking down that practice with you guys. And then I'm going to look at how the Titans roster grades out against the rest of the NFL for our last two shows of the week. So a lot of content coming your way. Again, make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. But with that being said, we do got to talk about these free agent signings because earlier in the offseason, General Manager Ran Carthon already talked about the fact that the Tennessee Titans needed to go out and sign a safety, that the Tennessee Titans needed to go out and sign an edge. They said this publicly. It's not just my view of the roster. Now, my view of the roster, and I'm sure all of you listening feel probably the same, they need a safety and they need another edge. Like, that is absolutely obvious. But the fact that they said it themselves publicly leads me to a place where they better go out and make some signings before training camp. Now, here's the reality of why these signings haven't happened so far. It's just something that we have to accept. These veterans do not want to do off-season workouts. These veterans do not want to come to voluntary OTAs. Justin Simmons, a Carl Lawson, these guys that I'm going to talk about, why would they want to go to these all-season activities when they could just be with their trainer that they've been with their entire career, do things their own way, like we see some of the Titans veterans doing right now, like Jeffrey Simmons, for example? Why would I want to show up to these all-season voluntary things? Now, my answer to that would be, well, you get acquainted with your teammates, you get accustomed to your coaches, you get the playbook, you learn the system, you just start to build chemistry more. But when you're a veteran who's been in the NFL for a decade, you're like, man, I don't need all that. That's what training camp is for. All right, do I necessarily 100% agree with that? No, but it's a reality of the situation, and it's a viewpoint and a perspective from the player that we have to at least respect and acknowledge. So, of course, none of these veterans were like, hey, I'm going to come in for the last week of OTAs. I wanted that to happen, but it's obvious that these vets do not want to do that. That's why a lot of them sign later into the summer if they've been on the market already. So you think about that, and it would make sense that sometime in the next 6 weeks before training camp kicks off, the Titans will make these signings. And you look at safety, number one. Look, the Titans have to make a signing at safety. Elijah Molden could step up, maybe be a surprise starter, but I just think he would be better in a third safety role. He can still contribute on special teams and not be expected to be a full-time starter. So obviously the top name is Justin Simmons, a multi-time All-Pro, was an All-Pro just last season. I believe this is a guy who gets production on the ball. He tackles. He does everything. He is incredibly versatile. He can do everything. So that is my top target. But then you look at a Marcus May, who was with Denard Wilson in New York with the New York Jets for a period, and that's when he had his best years of his career. So Marcus May isn't as good of a player as Justin Simmons. I don't think he's as good in coverage. He's not as instinctive, but he is physical, probably a better blitzer and somebody who you would want to do that at, you would want Marcus May to be in that position more. And with what we think the Titans are going to do on defense, I definitely do think that Marcus May is a good fit for what they want to do, and the Denard Wilson connection makes that a logical choice. I think that would be my second choice after Justin Simmons. But you also have guys like Quandre Diggs. Now, Quandre Diggs is more of a coverage-centric safety. I don't know that if he has the physicality level to be a blitzer and come downhill and play the aggressive style Denard Wilson wants, but he's still a good player who's played a ton of snaps in the NFL, and he's reliable. So Quandre Diggs would still get a positive reaction. From me, Eddie Jackson is another guy who he's an older player. He's in his 30s. He's not what he once was, but he's a coverage-centric safety who could play on the back end, make plays on the ball. And I wouldn't say that you want him to be around the line of scrimmage a ton at this stage, but he can do that if he absolutely has to. Jamal Adams is a name that everybody knows, but I keep making the joke all offseason. Jamal Adams is a defensive lineman to me. So one of the big questions for the Titans remaining is who is going to be that second starting safety. And I think they need to go out and get one of these veteran free agents that we're discussing right now to add to that mix. That's what I would expect. Edge is the other big spot, like I said, and Carl Lawson makes the most sense. Now, him and Denard Wilson didn't overlap at New York, but obviously Denard Wilson knows people for the New York Jets still. They can give him the lowdown on Lawson. Lawson is a big physical edge, and I think that's what the Titans need. He may not have the explosion or the pass rush ability that he once had before the injuries that he suffered, but he could be that early down physical edge setter that the Titans don't have. Harold Landry is a do-it-all edge. He can do everything. So obviously that's your starter. But Arden Key, they can say whatever they want, and they can give Arden Key all the opportunities. He's just not big and strong enough. He's lean, he's slim, he's long. He's just not big and strong enough to be an every down player. It's just not the case. And they're giving him the opportunity, but I think we know that's not going to work. And Rashad Weaver, I talked about as being a surprise starter. Maybe Rashad Weaver can step up into that role and be that guy. I just don't think you can count on that, and I think you at least need to bring in some competition. So, of course, Carl Lawson is at the top of my list. But another physical guy is Emmanuel Ogbah. I think that would make a ton of sense. Tyus Bowser has dealt with a ton of injuries. There's word out there, whispers out there that he's dealing with nerve issues, and he may never be able to play in the NFL again because the injuries have just robbed him. But Tyus Bowser coming out was a do-everything, very versatile edge rusher. So I would be interested in taking a chance on him. And Tyus Bowser was in Baltimore. Denard Wilson connection. That could make sense. Charles Harris is another name that I'll throw out there. I don't know that he has the athleticism to be an outside linebacker per se, but I think he could play physical and be on the edge for the Titans and be in that mix. No matter what you want to think, they need a fourth edge. And I think it should be one of those guys. And now that we're going to get past that last week of OTAs, the Titans definitely are in a position to lock down one of these guys and tell them, hey, make sure that you're here for training camp. Still get them the playbook early, all of that stuff. The Titans still have $24 million in cap space. Okay, so they have the money to sign some of these guys and still keep some of the money that they need to make moves during the season and leave themselves some versatility during the season to make signings and add guys to the roster when injury hits. So I think that those two positions definitely need it. Maybe interior D-line, but I'm going to say no. Maybe OT, offensive tackle, but I'm going to say no. We'll talk about those options when we get to those questions, though. More big questions to answer for the Titans. Before we answer them, do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Look, it's summertime, folks. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, and a ton of golf. The U.S. Open coming up soon. I'm so excited. You can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the finals MVP. Who knows who that's going to be? You're going to get great odds still there. Or who's going to hit one out of the park right now. The Mavericks, because they dropped to 0-2, are plus 640 to win the series. Look, Kristaps Porzingis, his health is on the line. The Mavs, I know the Mavs are going to come back out. Please, Mavs, come back out in game 3. Either way, make sure that you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Titans fans, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We're answering the biggest questions for the Tennessee Titans before training camp. Who should they sign in free agency because they still need some signings? Now I want to look at who could potentially start on the defensive side of the ball where there's still a lot of open positions. We're going to cap off the show talking about the right side of the offensive line and kick and punt returner, which I think is a conversation that we need to have more of going forward here. But before we continue answering these big questions, do want to thank you again for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. Again, it's your team every day. All right, do want to remind you guys, tomorrow the Titans are having practice open to the media, their last open practice of the all-season workout schedule before we get to training camp. You're not going to want to miss my breakdown of everything from there. Get all the information that you can. Curious to see who returns to practice and who doesn't. All right, very curious. But anyways, looking at the starters on defense, I want to start with inside linebacker. So when Cedric Gray was drafted in the 4th round, I think the optimistic part of me was like, hey, this guy's going to start from day one. And I think that Cedric Gray definitely does have the potential to start from day one. I still think that's on the board, and I'm excited to see this kind of play out during training camp. But right now, if I had to guess right now before training camp, I think that Jack Gibbens and Kenneth Murray would be the starters. Look, Gibbens just continues to go underrated. And I talked about Gibbens in the stock up portion of yesterday's show. Look, Gibbens is just the guy that the Titans, they just can't get rid of. You just simply can't. All right, he knows where he needs to be. He's an instinctive player. He's a smart player. He gets other people lined up. He's already getting rave reviews from the coaching staff that he knows the playbook. He knows what he's doing. Gibbens has good size. He's not an undersized guy, so that helps him. He's a bigger bodied guy, intelligent player. And like Brian Callahan said, you don't need to be a high-end athlete to be a good off-ball linebacker in the NFL. It's just simply not a prerequisite. Yes, does it give you a leg up? Certainly it does. But I think Brian Callahan is telling us right then and there, hey, just because he's not a freak athlete doesn't mean he can't be a starting linebacker for us. And if I'm honest, when you have a guy like Kenneth Murray, who's probably going to be a starter, I feel confident saying that. I think that Cedric Gray and Jack Gibbens are fighting for the other starting spot. I think Kenneth Murray, with what he was paid in free agency, he is going to be a starter for this team because they like his skill set as the hammer linebacker. With Kenneth Murray starting and the type of player that Kenneth Murray is, I think you got to have an intelligent, smart, savvy, instinctive linebacker next to him. Because Kenneth Murray, in my opinion, is none of those things. All right. Doesn't have good awareness. He just needs to. It reminds me of the linebacker from The Replacements. I don't think it's Jon Favreau. It might be Jon Favreau, though. Looking back on. No, I don't think it is. But the guy's like, I'll go get the ball, coach. I'll go get the ball for you. That's Kenneth Murray to me. Like, I don't want Kenneth Murray. And it's funny, if you listen to Jannard Wilson, he hasn't said it, I guess, as blatantly as I have, but he's kind of said the same thing, that Kenneth Murray is a player who you don't want thinking out there. Just let the dog off the leash. Let him go all over the place. Let him not have to worry about where he needs to be, when he needs to be there, dropping back into this coverage, finding this route concept, bumping this guy over the middle. Like, just let Kenneth Murray go downhill and go nuts. Use your speed, your size, your athleticism, your aggression, and just go crazy, man. Like, that's what you need. Well, if you're going to have somebody who's doing that, it's like a relationship. All right. And a lot of relationships One person is the more spontaneous person, maybe not as good of a planner, maybe not as good with money, but it's all about balance, right? And then on the other side of the relationship, you usually have the more stoic, reserved person who's maybe a little more thoughtful, who maybe is more of a planner. But I know in my relationship, that's how things are. And I bet you could guess which of those people I am in the relationship. Okay. I'm definitely the Kenneth Murray. But, anyways, the balance of Kenneth Murray with the Jack Gibbons makes a ton of sense. Now, I think that Cedric Gray can provide that balance as well, because Cedric Gray is a smart, heady player who can get everybody lined up. But at the end of the day, he is a rookie, and we've been talking so much about how difficult it is to be a rookie and get your feet underneath you and really feel comfortable with your environment and all of that. But that's my concern with T'Vondre Sweat's absences. We talked about Peter Skoronski and Will Levis talking about those things, and Josh Wiley talking about those things recently. So we got to acknowledge that that's a reality. And Cedric Gray, while I think he will be an important player on this defense and the third linebacker, I just think on early downs to start the game, Jack Gibbons being out there right now is my prediction. Although I could see Cedric Gray in a Jayon Brown third linebacker role where he's the primary linebacker on passing downs. So in that realm, he is still a starter of sorts. But I would go with Jack Gibbons right now. Moving along to interior defensive line, I think right now you got to go with Sebastian Joseph Day and you got to go with T'Vondre Sweat next to Jeffrey Simmons. We know in the base defense, it's going to be those guys. But when you drop the nickel and there's only two interior defensive linemen, to me right now, how could I say anything other than Jeffrey Simmons and Sebastian Joseph Day? Like, you can't count on T'Vondre Sweat to be a 3-down player at this point in time. One, he hasn't shown anything so far because he hasn't been out on the field. And two, coming into this, my expectation was that his snap count would be super limited, because that's just where you're going to be most effective using him, is to not have him out there 70 snaps a game. Have him out there about 30 snaps a game, 40 snaps a game. Early downs to stuff the run. Maybe rotate in a little bit on some third downs when he wasn't in on early downs to give him a break. I think that's the reality. But if you talk about the Titans' base nickel package with two interior defensive linemen, to me, it's obviously Jeffrey Simmons. But that other guy would be Sebastian Joseph Day right now. Okay? And I think that if T'Vondre Sweat continues to struggle, we could even see like a Keandre Coburn starting at nose tackle, which, again, to reiterate, I have major concern about interior defensive line, which leads to the question, should the Titans go get somebody in free agency? But I'm sorry, look at who's available. Brian Monet. That would be my top choice if the Titans bring one in. Chris Wormley, Hassan Ridgeway. Like, are any of these people better than Quentin Bohanna or Keandre Coburn or Marlon Davidson? Probably not. It's probably a wash. It's just going to be a huge hole for the Titans that they're still going to have to address next year. So either way, moving on though, looking at edge too, like I talked about earlier, right now I think Weaver would be the early down starter for the Titans, but they need to go get one of those free agents that we talked about in the last segment. And then safety. Right now, to me, it would be Elijah Molden. I mean, I don't know how it could be anybody else, but I would say Mike Brown. Mike Brown is a guy who I've seen out there on the field in some of these clips that we've seen. Mike Brown is a guy who I think is higher in the coaching staff's mind than maybe the fan base. Mike Brown is a very forgotten guy. He's dealt with some injuries, but when he was out there last year, he played pretty decent. So he could be a guy who I think fits the mold for the Titans, and then keep Elijah Molden in that third safety role. So keep your eye on Mike Brown. It wouldn't be great. That's why the Titans need to go get one of those free agent safeties, but I think it's definitely a possibility. Outside of that, I don't really have a lot of questions on defense. The starters cornerback is obviously set. You have Hooker, you have Simmons, you have Landry. Those are all good to go. But let's talk about offense, because obviously the right side of the offensive line is a big question mark. I'll give my predictions on who starts there, but who's going to be the kickoff returners for this Titans team? I think that's an interesting question as well. So we'll dive into those. Titans fans, let's cap off today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about the free agents that the Tennessee Titans need to sign, what positions they need to look at, how much free agency money they have with cap space. Then we talked about some starting spots on defense. I made my predictions for who gets those starting spots. Let me know your predictions down below. And again, this is just end of all-season practices predictions. These things can change as we get into training camp and all of that. I'll be doing some 53-man roster predictions before training camp starts and stuff like that as well. So make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. Also want to remind you guys that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV. It's called Locked On Sports Today. Look, guys, instead of turning on Fox and listening to all those people argue about nonsense, instead of turning on ESPN and listening to all those people argue about nonsense, throw on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or on Amazon Fire TV. Again, it's 24/7. You get Locked On experts talking about the top sports stories of the day. You get coverage of every league from all the national shows. It's a much better alternative to those classic sports medias that we grew up with. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on YouTube or the free Fire TV channels app 24/7. So you're not going to beat that. But looking at the right side of the offensive line, we talked about this a ton. So I'm just going to reaffirm my predictions here. Obviously, you have J.C. Latham at left tackle, Peter Skoronski at left guard, and Lloyd Cushenberry at center. Those are completely set in stone. I have no reservations about saying that those will be the starters on that side of the O-line. But you look at the other side, injuries, change in system. There's a lot of ups and downs. Now, I talked about this when I talked about stock up at right guard and right tackle. But right now, I think that Sadiq Charles is your favorite to be the starter at right guard. That is my prediction as things stand right now with Dylan Radins behind him. And Daniel Brunskill, man, he's fallen from 1 all the way to 3. Maybe he shocks the world and gets back up to be the starter, but they're working him at backup center right now. I think that Brunskill is a cut candidate, quite honestly. He could save the Titans $2 million. It would only be $500,000 in dead money. Give him an opportunity to go to a team where he fits better and could potentially be a starter. I think that would make a lot of sense for the Titans if they find a backup center. Now, they could just keep Brunskill around. Again, last year, had a solid start to the year, was one of the Titans' best offensive linemen to start the year. I just don't think he fits as well. So as a backup center, I think he's fantastic. That would be great. And then he could be a backup at one of the guard spots if you need him as well. I think he would be a great interior swing lineman. But I have a hard time seeing him beating out Radins and Charles, who are just much bigger, stronger guys, who are younger guys too. You know what I mean? So to me, I got to go with Sadiq Charles at right guard. That's my prediction for right now. And at right tackle, I know that John Ojukwu is playing first string right now. Jalen Duncan could maybe come back and compete, but I still think that Nicholas Petit-Frere will be the starter at right tackle. That is still my guess right now. I think John Ojukwu could make the roster. He could be somebody who finds his way on the team. That would be a huge accomplishment for the undrafted free agent out of Boise State from a couple years ago. But I still do think that the Titans give Nicholas Petit-Frere his chance because he's just got way more upside. He was the higher draft pick. I just think he makes more sense. Give him a shot, and he needs to be back by training camp. That's going to be something that we talk about a lot over the next few weeks until training camp gets here. But moving away from the offensive line, I did want to touch on kickoff returner, punt returner right now, because if I had to guess, if I had to give you my prediction, I think that Treylon Burks and Jaquan Jackson are your kickoff returners. Now, remember, the kickoff is going to be entirely different this year. All right. And I think teams are going to look to get the ball in the hands of guys that maybe they wouldn't have in previous years. And I think Burks is that guy. Just get him the ball in his hands. Just let him catch the ball. And then he's got a ton of space, and let him do what he did in college. Run in space, run over people, run by people. And Brian Callahan was talking about how Treylon Burks needs to make an impact on special teams to justify his roster spot and being active on game days. This is a great way to give him that opportunity. Is Treylon Burks going to be a great gunner on punt? Is he going to be somebody who's great at coverage team on kickoff? I have my doubts. I have my reservations. Absolutely. So to me, you want to give Treylon Burks a special teams opportunity to make him worth keeping around on the roster. It's kickoff returner. Let's see what he can do with the ball in his hands in space, and let's just see what happens. And then, of course, the rookie Jaquan Jackson, I think he was drafted to do that. They knew that would be a role for him. So kickoff returner, Burks and Jackson. For punt return, Jaquan Jackson. That's my guess. Again, I think he was drafted more to do that than he was to be a wide receiver. If he gives you something at wide receiver, that's a bonus. But the Titans desperately needed somebody as a returner, and I think Jaquan Jackson was meant to do that. So obviously, I'm going to roll with him on both of those. But give Treylon Burks a chance. Give him a chance to do that kickoff return. That would be very interesting, in my opinion. Again, tomorrow, Titans practice, open to the media. I'm going to be breaking it down, recapping everything you need to know. You're not going to want to miss that. But with that being said, that is going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.